Winter has always been a time for gathering in the longhouse and sharing information around the fire. This is our contribution to that tradition. Like shooting, off-roading is something that every American male is born knowing everything there is to know about. So I'm a little loath to even approach the subject, but it's on my mind because I've had to extract two different people 2 weekends in a row. So I want to talk just a little bit about vehicle preparedness, what you might carry, and a little bit about how to set your rig up. There's two different camps right now. Well, not camps, but there's kind of two different groups. One is the classic four-wheeling, rock crawling, more technical stuff, built-up rigs that to a certain extent are so built that you can't use them for anything else. A lot of these rigs get trailered, so they're not really practical using vehicles. And then on the other end, there's overlanding, which I am definitely philosophically in line with, and that's traveling long distances on less than paved roads, but maybe not as technical stuff. Although that whole camp has become a caricature of itself, kind of typified by the rooftop tent. So as usual, we're gonna not really fall into either orthodoxy. But what we do is use our rigs for getting to remote trailheads and for camping out of, oftentimes multiple times a week they're off-road. So just general using, and that's kind of the approach that I'm going to take and what I'm going to talk about. So the first thing as far as preparedness is caring for the occupants. You have vehicles convey people, and so there's some life support stuff that you need to have with you. The first thing is that vehicle accidents, more likely highway than off-road, but vehicle accidents are really the time you're most likely to need a trauma kit. So carry a trauma kit in your rig and get some TCCC based training so you know how to use it. That's an important thing. Next, water, food. Water's the big one. Kind of depends on where you live, but I carry 2 gallons. I live in the desert. It's normally just me. 2 gallons is probably a little bit light. If I'm actually going on a trip out into the desert, I'll add another 5 gallon. And in the rig that is likely to have the family in it, there's always 5 gallons. So, carrying your water is crucial. The next thing is food. You're not really in any kind of vehicle-based emergency. You're not going to starve to death, but food helps with morale and energy in the short term. So I carry nuts, some of those nut clusters. They're really temperature stable and last a long time, and they're light. So that's what I have in my rig. And then insulation is the other big thing, particularly in the winter, keeping people warm in the event that your vehicle goes down. I mean, you can go from simply traveling on the highway to a significant emergency situation in the winter, particularly like on the northern plains where a norther comes in and there's not a lot of folks and criminy. So always have enough insulation, be it jackets or a sleeping bag or whatever, to keep people warm if the vehicle loses its ability to travel. So that is the life support stuff. Okay, so the next thing is how to get your vehicle out. Basic stuff to be able to get your vehicle out. Number one, shovel. I carry mine on the hood to remind me that it's usually the best choice out of all the different recovery stuff I'm carrying, and it's also convenient there if I need to go dig a latrine. Most times you get stuck, it's going to take time, but you can dig out. Digging around the wheels, placing or freeing up a path to drive through. And it's cheap. It's something everybody can have in their trunk, so that's the number one thing I'd add. The next thing to think about is traction, how you're going to add some traction to the situation. Max tracks are the gold standard. They're spendy. I don't have a set yet. You can also plan on cutting branches and stuff to create traction, in which case you ought to be carrying a saw or an axe. Saw first line, axe second line. So that's something that you can have for traction aid. I've also got a set here of something called Go Treads. Let's see if These are unfold, so they're easy to store. They're they can be used in different configurations. They can be used as a base for your jack. The one time I tried to use these, it was a 1-ton truck that was stuck in a snowbank, and they were useless, but that doesn't mean that they wouldn't be helpful in other circumstances. Oh, a note on trucks. Thinking back on it, I think most of the time that I've had to help somebody out, they were in a truck. A pickup truck, a 4-wheel drive pickup truck, unless you've got weight over that rear axle, you do not have a 4-wheel drive, you have a 2-wheel drive. You got to have the rear axle weighted if you're going to get any use out of that 4-wheel drive. Last 2 weekends it was trucks. So anyway, side note on trucks, but so have a plan for traction under the tires. The next thing to think about is, if you can't get your shovel, if you can't shovel out enough to get traction underneath, how are you going to get that wheel up? And that means one thing, a high lift jack. High lift jack, and they do fail. They're very reliable, but the pin system, the pin and spring system, you got to keep it lubricated, particularly if it's right on the outside of your rig. And you can also buy spare pin and spring kits, and for the price of them, you might as well carry a spare set in your rig in case you have to rebuild your high lift. And the other thing you're going to need with your high lift, a lot of modern vehicles don't have a lift point where you can put the high lift hook on. And if you're wanting to get underneath a wheel, it may be better just to lift the wheel. So definitely get that high lift kit that's designed to lift just the wheel. And it can go on other places, but that makes that a more useful thing for lifting. So then the next thing to talk about is pulling, recovery. Rather than just giving the tire traction, how are we going to actually pull the vehicle out under external power source? So the first thing you're going to need, even if you don't have a winch or anything yourself, if somebody comes along, they're going to need to be able to pull you out. So make sure your vehicle is equipped with front and rear good recovery points. And this can, some are from the factory, some you can buy aftermarket factory ones that bolt into the frame. You could bolt one through the frame, the right aftermarket bumper, front bumper, your tow hitch is one. Those are all good recovery points. 2 weekends ago, the guy had to pull out. I had to get real creative because he didn't have any front recovery points, and I didn't mess up the plastic front end crap too much, but if he'd had recovery points, it would have been nothing to just hitch onto him and pull him back up the hill he needed to get up. So then you got your recovery points. A good Samaritan can pull you out. But you need to be prepared to pull yourself out or help them in pulling you out. This is the next step, and it's important. A good tow strap, and this is a static tow strap. It's not something that's going to flex. There's dynamic ones that are designed to called snatch straps. I'm talking about the static one is the one that you want. Incidentally, if you're pulling this receiver hitch, you just stick this into your receiver hitch and put the hitch pin through it. Don't mess with shackles or putting it on the ball or any of that crap. It'll be a real good solid placement for you and also for anybody who's who you're pulling out if you can get into that receiver hitch. And also some smaller straps to attach to vehicle, to do a V in the front if you got 2 tow points in front, that kind of thing. Alright, so how are you going to use that to pull yourself out? Well, a winch is certainly one option. We've never run winches on our vehicles. There's reliability issues. You have to test them regularly to make sure they're running. There's cost issues. There's weight issues because you're going to need not just the winch, but a winch-ready bumper and probably suspension to account for the weight of that winch. Over the years, something like maybe 40% of the times that we've been stuck, would anything like that have even been useful because there was no point to pull from. So I would definitely rank a traction aid way above a winch in usefulness because, well, you just look out here, there's not a single thing if I was stuck I'd be able to pull off of. And yes, some people carry pull pals, for desert use, which is basically a big anchor that goes into the ground that you can pull off of, and if you want to get into that, fine. But there's another option that you should already be carrying, which is that high lift jack. You can tow with a high lift jack. It's going to take time, it's going to be cumbersome, but you can do it. And you got to weigh how often you think you're going to need to do that recovery versus what you're carrying to handle it with. If I had to do, you know, a recovery, or if I had to pull my vehicle, you know, just by myself, self-recover, you know, more than every other month, I'd probably put a winch on. But for me, pulling a vehicle out, that's like every second or third year. So I'll take the 2 hours it takes to use the high lift jack to pull myself out. The catch with a high lift jack is that you can only pull 3 feet at a time, and then you have to reset your whole system and then pull another 3 feet. That's why it takes time. Something that you're going to have, even if you've got the even if you buy High Lift's little tow kit, you're still going to need a come along to tension the system, because the weight of that high lift getting it up off the ground, so it's taut enough that you can actually do a pull with it. You can take up the slack with this. Nice thing about this, you might be able to pull with just this. You know, this has got 12 foot of cable. There was one time, there's a 3/4 ton pickup that was buried up to the axles in mud, and all we had was a shovel and one of these, and believe it or not, that was enough to get that thing out. I mean, it took 3 hours, but it was doable. When you get one of these, make sure it's rated for what you want, rated for the weight of your rig, and then some, double the weight of your rig. Make sure it's a double catch instead of a single catch on one side. If you go to Tractor Supply Company, I mean, there's some with 3 foot, 4 foot handles that maybe you could do your whole pull with. The other thing is, make sure the hooks on it are good hooks that actually will tie in with your system. With this one, I had to put new hooks on just so that I could thread it through my tow strap and stuff like that. But you know, that's something you're going to need, and it's small and light and easy to have. Spare. It makes sense to have a full-size spare tire. Honestly, I've never, not once have I had to replace a tire out in the backcountry. And maybe that's because I use good tires, maybe I don't do crazy stuff. Still, it makes sense to have a full-size spare. I don't get wrapped around the axles about it matching my primaries. And in fact, I don't even get wrapped around the axles about it being the right size. These are 33s, that's a 31. Theoretically, you should have the same exact size, but you know, if I have to put that thing on and drive 200 miles to get to where I can get a tire repaired, fine, that's going to work out just fine. And I haven't sunk a whole bunch of money into a matching spare that, in my case, wouldn't have even fit back there where I needed it anyway. Okay, so spare. So I'm going to just run through the other stuff I have. I carry an axe, I carry a saw, I carry a kind of boo-boo first aid kit, a more comprehensive first aid kit, chains. I've only got one set. I kind of wish I had two, but I don't really have space for two, but a set of chains for muddy conditions, snowy conditions. A inverter, power inverter, spare box of ammo for my pistol, 3.5 gallons of gas. That's, you know, maybe gilding the lily. I get between 200 and 300 miles on a tank out of this thing. So do I really need that? It doesn't hurt. And I've actually got it set up so these are Rotopax, which is good stuff, by the way. I've got it set up so I could throw another couple 4 gallons of Rotopax on top if it was that kind of trip. But you know, on a normal basis, I got 3.5 gallons, and that feels fine to me. Anything else I'm carrying? No. Okay. So as far as a bunch of D-rings and stuff like that, and straps to strap stuff on top. And I've also got a mountain serape in there all the time. So setting a rig up. First thing, you're going to want better tires than came on it. I recommend the Bfgoodrich ATs. The newest incarnation's really good in mud. On the road, you can maybe tell that they're not street tires, but they're not far off. I did run a set of mud tires on this all the way through their useful life, and I will not ever do that again. Too much road noise. And you know, even though this is not a trip that I'm going to travel thousands of miles with my family, I got to the point I didn't want to drive at 100 miles to a trailhead, and that's just silly. So the BFG ATs are a fantastic choice. They come in a variety of sizes, and I've got them on 3 different vehicles right now. You want to try to go bigger than stock. There's a whole lot of variables that come into play that I'm not going to get into, but bigger rolls more easily. What you don't want to do is overdo your car's gearing or ability to handle it, which actually raises an important point, particularly the overlanding camp. Those guys will hang so much crap off of their vehicle that the power to weight ratio is just gone. You know, if you want all that crap, fine, but all it's going to do is decrease the effectiveness of your vehicle to have all that stuff. But at any rate, go bigger with tires if you can. The second thing, and these go hand in hand, suspension. Good suspension is going to run you $2,000 minimum. If you go with like a 2.5-inch lift, your vehicle's going to be better on road and off road if you go with a good one. For Toyotas, Old Man Emu's kind of the reference. For Jeeps, it's going to be AEV, American Expedition vehicles. Other makes I don't know, but in both of those cases you can get a real good 2.5-inch lift that doesn't mess with your driveline angles, makes it way more streetable, makes it better off-road, and it's just something you're going to need to plan on if you really want to be serious about doing much off-road travel. Good suspension keeps the traction on the ground. It's kind of an overlooked component of keeping your tires where they need to be so you can go. And incidentally, this is true even if you've got like a Toyota TRD or a Jeep Rubicon. I don't know about the Dodge Power Wagon, but the first two, the suspension that comes on, you might think, oh, I'm buying this package that's ready to go. It's not really that good. It's barely a step above straight up stock, and the AEV offering and the Old Man Emu offering is so much better that if you're serious about it, you're going to get those anyway. So don't think that you're saving money on suspension you're not going to have to buy if you get one of those packages. So those two things right there, tires and a little bit of a lift, that's mostly all I've ever run, and it gets me a whole lot of places, and it's great. As far as traction aids, lockers, here's where I am with that. Lockers, so basically all-wheel drive doesn't force power to any wheel specifically. Four-wheel drive forces a 50-50 split between the front axle and the rear axle. Then what happens with the power once it gets there is dependent upon what's in the differential. So if you have open differentials, which is most vehicles, you can basically bleed all the power to that axle off on a wheel that has no traction. In fact, that's what'll happen, because if a wheel gets stuck and another wheel has no traction, the wheel with no traction will just spin and spin, so you've lost all the power to that axle. Same thing with the front end. So a locker, which is kind of what's in vogue, is basically once the power gets to that axle, it forces a 50-50 split between the two wheels. This is what, like the TRD comes with a rear locker, Rubicon comes with rear and front locker, Power Wagon rear and front locker. The thing about lockers is there is no give, there's no bias, so it can be real hard on axle shafts. You can only engage them in two-wheel drive low. I mean, some folks will do an electronic hack, I think, to use them in four low. But really they're only useful in that extreme low-end circumstance. And then there's a reliability issue because the actuation mechanism, whether it's the vacuum lines of the ARB or the electronic that comes stock in like the Rubicon and everything, that stuff wears out just sitting there. So lockers do give you a lot of traction, but they're kind of limited in application and usefulness. This vehicle, after owning it for 18 years, I just put in geared limited slip front and rear, and what that does is forces at least a 40-60 bias. In a perfect world you're getting 50-50, but at least a 40-60 bias. So you, compared to true lockers, it might be 20% less power that you're putting on the ground for the entire system. But the upside of it is it's part of your differential. There's no actuation. It's always there. It's always working. It's 100% reliable. It helps you in two-wheel drive on the highway on your rear axle. You put it into four high, it helps you, which is for me kind of the most common case, that I'm on a muddy road or something and I want that lock stuff working, but I don't want to be in 4 low and I don't want to be locked up so that I can't even steer. I just want a lot better traction in 4 high. And then of course in 4 low, you know, it works really well too. I wish more vehicles came with that. I think some of the Jeeps, some of the non-Rubicon Jeeps come with that. So if you're thinking about getting a JK, you might think seriously, even though you think you want the Rubicon, you know you're going to redo the suspension anyway, and maybe you're better off with that limited slip rear, as long as you can get the good Dana 44 axles in it. You know, maybe you're better off just going with that and adding limited slip front to the front axle and putting your AEV suspension on and being ahead of where you would be if you had the stock Rubicon. Just some stuff to think about. So you know, that's just a real quick run through. I know I'm going to get flack for some of my opinions, which is probably not new, but you know, this is a lot of years, a lot of getting stuck. In fact, my four-wheeling experience goes back to when I was 5 and Mom and Dad put me in the driver's seat of our Volkswagen Bug up in Alaska so they could push the Bug out while I drove, which kind of turned into its own circus. But over the years, there's been a lot that we've seen and done when it comes to vehicle travel, and you know, what I've just talked about, I think, is a real practical approach to the whole thing.
Me and RJ and the kids was on a camp out in the mountains, and we had us one of them U-Drive Marmy Jeep cars, which we'd rented from a fella by the name of Kubosky for $30 a day. Buy your gas along the way, take a rabbit's foot, and leave a pint of blood for a deposit. And he explained it all to us, how we were supposed to get to Telluride, which is 50 miles away by way of the regular highway. However, there was a shortcut.